I think all of us, and I definitely include myself, all of us for a very long time took American democracy for granted. I think almost all of us assumed that no matter how recklessly our politicians behaved, we couldn't possibly break American democracy. American democracy, we believed, was indestructible. And to us, it's becoming clear that that's not the case. It's not true that American democracy is dead. It's not true that it's necessarily dying. But there are definite warning signs.
Author Steve Levisky spoke to LME First Lady Carol Costello about his book How Democracy Dies in September of 2019. This same concern of democracy failing is one that both state and national politicians have voiced to members of Election 2020.
Our democracy is the most important thing that makes sure that our government works for us rather than the other way around. If we lose that, we lose everything.
In a democracy, we get the government we deserve. And if we want better government, we need young people and everybody else to come off the sidelines and be involved.
The fight before us is without any question a fight for not only America's identity, it's a fight for America's system of justice, it's a fight for the rule of law, and it's a fight for our democracy.
But how is democracy dying? Levisky explained that democracy dies through something he calls constitutional hardball.
It's very easy for politicians, if they choose, to use the letter of the law in ways that subvert the spirit of the law.
He gave some examples of what he means.
Just to give one very simple example, the president has a power of executive pardon in the United States, in the Constitution. That means that technically the president can pardon anybody he or she wants at any time, for any reason. Another example, court packing. It is entirely legal if the president has a majority in Congress. It's entirely legal, entirely constitutional to pass a law that expands the size of the Supreme Court from 11 to 20 and allows the president to then fill the 9 seats with ideological or partisan allies and therefore tilt the court dramatically in his favor. At the state level, as you mentioned, in more than a dozen states, Republicans have have adopted laws that make it harder for people to register and vote. The most egregious example in the last decade, I think, was the Republican Senate's decision not to allow President Obama to fill the Supreme Court seat created by the death of Justice Scalia. That move, not voting down a nominee, but saying we're not even going to consider anybody you put up. You could put Jesus Christ up and we're not going to hold hearings. Well, this was unprecedented in the modern United States.
When I asked them how they would solve the failure of democracy in the United States, candidates responded with multiple solutions to the problem of constitutional hardball.
So it's the gerrymandering, it's the money, it's the influence of lobbying interests, of voter suppression, things like that. That if we make them a part of a comprehensive agenda, I think we can make a difference.
I think a president should actually support election security. A president should do things to make sure these social media platforms are regulated so we can't have disinformation campaigns.
We work hard to make sure we return power to the grassroots, and I'm really happy you mentioned the issue of superdelegates. After a very long and inclusive process, we changed the superdelegate rules last year.
And we're launching the Shriver Volunteer Initiative to start activating citizenship, to re-engage democracy. Democracy is not just something that occurs every 2 years or 4 years on election day. It's what happens in between that matters.
It's why we need to get money out of politics. It's why we need to draw our districts in a fairer way. It's why we need a Voting Rights Act, a 21st century Voting Rights Act that prevents racially motivated and partisan motivated political manipulation. And it's why I believe we should have a national popular vote in this country. Pick our country's leader the way democracies do, by giving it to the person who got the most votes.
But what got us to this point where those things are happening and politicians are no longer, living by those unwritten democratic rules?
I think the story begins with partisan polarization. The Democrats are this weird rainbow coalition of urban, educated whites and a range of ethnic minorities, and the Republicans are basically a white Christian party, almost nobody else. And so what? The problem with that, very quickly, is that white Christians founded this country. White Christians, until 50 years ago, not only were an overwhelming majority of the electorate, but they occupied the top rung of every important hierarchy in this country. political, economic, cultural, social. They held the presidency, they were the senators, they were the Supreme Court justices, they were the governors, they were the CEOs, they were the television newscasters, they were the college professors, they were the faces of both the Democratic and Republican Party. Now those days are long gone, especially here in California, but they're long gone across the country. However, losing a majority, and in particular losing one's group's dominant social status, is a tough thing. It's a threatening thing, and for many Republicans, it feels like an existential threat.
Levisky claims that to current Republicans, the Democratic Party is perceived as an existential threat. He then explained how that phenomenon can be so dangerously polarizing.
They see the opposition as a threat to their way of life, and which makes them more radicalized as voters and makes them more willing to support politicians who promise not only to end certain policies or to lower taxes, but to basically destroy the other side.
But since the last election, Republicans are no longer the only ones who perceive the opposite party as a threat to their way of life. More and more Democrats are expressing those very sentiments towards Donald Trump.
We know that there is a threat, and that threat to our democracy is Donald J. Trump.
We've got a president who doesn't understand it, doesn't appreciate it, does not appreciate the Constitution.
We are at a point in America where we're seeing this president say he has an America First policy. But what it really means is America isolated and alone policy. In fact, he has a better relationship with people like Duterte and Putin than he has with Merkel and Macron.
When you have a president who short circuits our own military justice system to block justice for war crimes and accusations of war crimes, that undermines the very foundation of U.S. credibility and honor around the world.
The real radical party right now is the Republican Party. They deny science. They allow people, they allow children to be put in cages.
According to Levisky, the threat presented by Donald Trump has drawn attention to a new debate within the Democratic Party.
There's a debate now among Democrats about whether Democrats should learn how to fight like Republicans, whether they should do the same thing in response and not play the sucker, or whether they should continue to engage in forbearance. That kind of escalation, that sort of tit-for-tat behavior, where one side plays dirty so the other side responds, that almost invariably leads to an escalation that's very difficult to stop. And that kind of escalation almost never ends well. It's very hard to get off the train at some point. And so we think it would be really dangerous for the Democrats to engage in the same sort of behavior that Republicans would be.
This is Veronica BP, Election 2020, Loyola Marymount University.